OP13 carrying on his will has finally released out in the West. And regardless if you prefer a jungle format or a more centralized format, the fact of the matter is that this meta has completely changed the game. Obviously, you clicked on this video because you want to know my opinions on the OP13 meta and what decks are viable. This one's styled going to be a little bit different. I'm going to be introducing every single deck in a tier at a single time, and then kind of talk about them each one individually. The first tier I don't think is going to surprise any of you. There are 3 decks that I think are a cut above the rest: Emu, Ace, and Zoro. Now, what I will say about the 3 is I think the 2 best decks without really much debate is Emu and Ace. Zoro, I feel like, is the most fringe deck in this category, can really switch between this first category that I have of best decks and pretty good, especially in a triangle meta that kind of we're in, where it kind of rotates. There's a certain point within the rotation that Zoro becomes a really, really good meta call. In terms of the different really good meta calls that you can have, I think these 3 decks fit that category. Ace, I think, is the second best deck in the format, especially with all the new Whitebeard Pirate stuff that you got, being able to cheat out the 10 cost, continuously play the 10 cost, have access to Roger, especially with that new Garp searcher. You know, all of these key pieces are very easily found that are not Whitebeard Pirates, and Roger in the Uta, in the Yamato, and being able to draw cards and filter the bricks in your hand as 2Ks essentially makes this just a very powerful deck. It is much more exploitable within the overall general meta than Emu. Emu, I think, is the best deck in format without really much debate. And one thing that I think you're going to notice with a lot of people is that a lot of people are going to play Emu at the start of this format. It's a super cheap deck. It's like literally a budget deck, mostly comprised of rares and 4 SRs. Maybe a little bit more if you want to play Stussy, but it's not mandatory that you do. A lot of players are going to start out playing Emu, but I think it has a very high skill ceiling, similar to what we saw in Sakazuki, right? Especially in its prime in OP05, OP06 era. Especially as we get later and later into this format through December and up until January's release of OP14, you're going to see a fall off potentially in population with the deck compared to these first couple weeks of November, but those top players that have committed to Emu and are going to be continuously playing Emu, learning every single minute decision and action and best play possible, holy smokes, they're going to be a formidable foe, and you're going to see a lot of people repeat success in these tournaments. I very much think that this is a skill meta where the best players are going to be very highly rewarded. If you want to step up your game with Emu, maybe you want to commit to learning it, but you don't know where to start, let's talk about the sponsor of today's video. I have got with me a free guide that I'm going to give away to one of you from Fletch and Trace's Metafy page about Emu. But I got this guide over a week ago, and I spent a long time reading through it, practicing within the guide, applying a lot of the principles that are mentioned by Fletch and Trek, 2 very incredible players that have numerous accolades of their own. And let me tell you, I definitely recommend this guide. So it's pretty easy to be able to win this giveaway, a free guide for you. Literally a 9.8 out of 10, and actually recently updated since they've published. So, you know, if you get this once, you're going to have it for life, even after all the updates. All you have to do to get a chance to win this guide completely free, you need to 1, leave a like on this video, but 2, click the link to my Patreon down below. I recently launched a Patreon, and it's completely free to join. You don't have to pay anything. And that's it. Thank you again to Fletch and Tretch for giving this to me to give away to you guys. So let's say I'll pull the winner on the 16th of November, that is. If you're watching this like in December or something, I don't know. But anyways, those are my 3 best decks. I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead to the rogue category. In my opinion, you could pretty much just generalize any of these other tiers as like a rogue status because the top 3 decks are so good and contain so much of the population. But these are a lot of fun leaders that I think are pretty decently viable, and especially based on your local meta, if maybe you don't have a lot of emus or you don't have a lot of aces, or maybe your locals are generally much more casual, this is the stuff that you could do. I probably wouldn't take any of these leaders to a regional, unfortunately, but they're pretty okay. The main ones that I kind of really want to touch up on, Blue Purple Sanji. I think Blue Purple Sanji has a chance to move up in the top cut squeakers category personally. I think especially because your 3 cost Sanjis are stuck on the board board, right? They're going to be continuous swings, especially if you can counter out of the attacks that are incoming. You do have to worry a little bit about the Emu matchup, especially with the Nuzjuro, right? Doing minusing. And then also on top of that, Marcus Mars KOs your blocker Reiju because it goes off of original cost. You can get some things with the Ace matchup to where they can't remove anything except for potentially a Red Rock, which you're probably okay with. Sakazuki, I think, is a very hard deck to play within this format, but if you don't really have any Emu going around at your local scene, I think that you can potentially make a little bit of noise, right? Especially if you have a good focus on removal stuff in your deck. For stuff like Nami, Yamato, Bonnie, I feel like you're kind of waiting around for the EBO3 format, which I'll put out a video later this week talking about the release schedule of the One Piece trading card game in the East and the West. So it's probably going to be a while before you really want to pick up these decks and really start grinding with them. I know that Nami, though, did have a really cool end to the OP12 format, winning one of the regionals. So there could be a chance for it to move up potentially, but I think you're pretty reliable and just really waiting on those EBO3 cards. Smoker is really the last one I'll talk about. I think Smoker just kind of really, I don't know, I just feel like it falls off a bit. I've just not really been impressed after we got through the EBO2 format, and it just keeps going lower and lower on my list. All right, let's talk about the top cut squeakers category. I'll talk pretty much about every single one of these decks. Bello Betty reemerges into the meta, in my opinion, simply because, similar to what it did in OP12, you can just literally go faster than all the other decks if you want. If a deck is not capable of handling your insane speed in the early game and can kind of control the game, you will just blast through them, right? Especially with a new introduction of a 3-life leader in Ace and also potentially Emu. Lim I've been super impressed with, especially with the Chinos Cup results that have been happening these last couple weeks in OP13 format. Getting that 10 cost Shanks really puts in another level to this deck that I think it was really missing in a good boss monster, right? Especially because Lim can kind of maneuver around the 10 cost Shanks' effect and be able to play a character off of your leader effect. Makes it a pretty viable one in my opinion if you're a big Lim lover and want to bring it around in OP13. I think that Blackbeard can do a little bit of damage. I think a lot of people that are going to play Blackbeard are going to move into something like Emu or Ace, right? Especially with all of the different on plays that your opponent could utilize. Like, think about Emu not really having on plays with the Shalria, with the Saturn, the Mars, and then also being able to do stuff like Black Hole, Black Vortex, Liberation, to be able to like negate the protection effects on Emu and stuff like that and be able to battle through. I'd just be really curious about Blackbeard. I think he's my big wild card like heading into this format, and I'm really curious to see how he lands in official results. Zoro Sanji, I absolutely love, if you know me and have been watching my videos for a bit, and we talked about how people like Akailakai went undefeated in a championship side event stuff. I don't know exactly his record or matchups or anything like that, but it was a pretty interesting way to play the list that a lot of people had not put together, in my opinion. There's different ways to build this depending on the meta, and I think he's in a really, really cool spot, and similar to what he kind of was before, like as an aggro deck and stuff, there's some cool options that you can include in this deck. Red Green Luffy, I think, is a pretty cool one, especially before we get the December promos, right? I think it gets a lot harder once those December promos come out and stuff like UP Luffy, Roger, Sabo all get buffed, but like a really interesting mix of like offense and defense, right? Your leader effect being more defensive, but having the offensive side of what we've seen in the Japan Championships, right? In the 3v3 with Red Green Luffy, having the 9 cost Zoro do like 4 unblockable swings is crazy if you're an aggro deck. I think he's in a cool spot, and some people have asked me some questions of how I feel about Red Green Luffy, and I definitely think he's viable. Red Green Law, I think, is kind of on the teetering edge alongside Green Purple Luffy as like hanging on between Top Cut Squeakers and Rogue. Or wait, I called it Top Deck Squeakers. It should say Top Cut, but anyways. Law, also being a super aggressive deck, has the potential and the possibilities similar to Bello Betty, Zoro Sanji, right? To just go way faster than your opponent. In my mind as well, I think he's kind of a little bit waiting on EBO3 because that new secret rare coming in EBO3 is actually pretty good in the deck. I was not high on it to start when the first reveals happened, but seeing more lists, seeing more games, pretty good. But it wouldn't surprise me if a lot of you think, you should move him down one. I wouldn't fight it too much, I don't think. And then Green Purple Luffy. Green Purple Luffy really holding on for its life, especially because Emu really hits on original cost stuff. Just makes the matchup so difficult. And then Ace as well is just a struggle, right? Especially once they get to those high 9-cost new gate counts. Sabo even. I've tested a couple games with it. I'm not going to say that I'm a master in the matchup or anything like that, but I truly think that it's Sabo favored, especially once you get your 6-cost blockers out in their 8Ks. You really have a free block like every single turn against Green Purple Luffy. It's a battle of resources, and I think you win that battle, especially because your hack that you're definitely playing before the release of EBO3, before the release of the Sabo McDonald's promo that we're getting in tournament packs, by the way. When I say McDonald's promo, I mean tournament packs. You just completely negate Zorojuro, right? Because even if they cost boost Zorojuro, hack deals with an original cost of 4. So your stage, in my opinion, is like much more irrelevant a lot of times. All right, let's talk about the final category, the pretty good category. Now, I think this one is a little interesting, especially because I talked about how UP Luffy and Roger get boosted when those promos come out. I have a hard time distinguishing of whether or not I wanted to keep them in this tier, that I put them in the pretty good tier, or the top deck squeakers before the promos. I think definitely after the promos, both of those cards with the 8-cost Roger promo get slotted into this pretty good category. But I think especially, right, I mean, it's really tough. We've seen it time and time again with Blue Purple Luffy, right? When they hit their curve and they hit the exact cards they need, it's really tough to beat the deck. And Roger is the same thing. They're almost like the same deck, except Roger can't play 2 bodies in 1 turn. That's the big problem. Purple Luffy, I think, is a really cool one, and I can understand if you teeter this between like the top deck squeakers category and the pretty good category. I think it's also very similar to Blue Purple Luffy and Roger, to where like if you see the curve, it's so good, especially when you talk about, you know, you've probably watched the different content creators that have made videos on Blue Purple Luffy, you know, Denim, Cardi Kaizoku, showing off like how good Magellan is, right? Magellan skyrocketed in price because of how good it is in like the Emu matchup, the Ace matchup, even really any matchup, knocking your opponent off curve for another turn. I think especially in the early stages of the format, I think that Purple Luffy could be a really, really good pick. And then once those promo comes out, maybe you knock him down a little bit. Rayleigh, I still think, is the premier aggro deck. As I mentioned in OP12, it's definitely going to take a little bit more for it to get knocked down, and it's knocked down a bit from when it was in OP12, but I think OP13, it's still a strong and viable pick. Your removal aspect is probably a little bit worse, right? With not being able to remove stuff in Emu, the Ace matchup, right? Being able to draw a card off of KOs. But I still think with your Luffy Sanji combos, I think you can definitely do a good bit of damage, especially with like Conqueror's Hockey, an unblockable event, and even maybe more unblockable text that you can provide, similar to Red Green Luffy. We'll talk about Sabo. Obviously, this is my pick. I think that it's a good, viable deck. I think that you have a pretty decent matchup into Ace, and so especially because it's one of the 2 best decks, right? Ace, I think that Sabo is just a fair one to do. A lot of the times in the Emu and the Zoro matchup, you can definitely skill difference your opponent, and if your opponent knocks off a beat and they miss a certain something or whatever, you can really capitalize on that because your deck is so consistent with the stage. 1-cost Bello Betty, 1-cost Koala, Garp, especially like in the Ace matchup, and you can even do this in the Zoro matchup or a lot of these other matchups. Stussy is a broken card. Like in Ace, if I play 2 Stussies, I cannot lose. Bunny is the final deck that I'll talk about, and I'm still pretty decently high on Bunny, right? Being able to rest anything at certain points of the game, really make it a tricky matchup to be able to work against. And there's different plays that you can make, right? When we saw the Japan Championship, when Bonnie ended up winning, we saw stuff like the 10-cost Law and Beppo within the deck to be able to be on the proactive side of resting and freezing something, gaining 2,000 power to be a 7k leader to help with getting out of different attacks, and by the way, establish a big body on the field. I think that Bonnie's in a pretty cool format. I think maybe it goes down a little bit. I don't know if it moves down from the pretty good tier in stuff like EBO3 when we get that, which will be a whole different tier list video because OP14 in the West comes out before EBO3, and so that means also a little bit of EBO4 comes out before EBO3. Again, I'll make a video on the release schedule because I've actually gotten a lot of questions on that. And so I want to help you guys like clarify and understand what the release schedule is going to look like, and also this channel. Once again, don't forget about the giveaway of the Emu guide from Fletch and Trek. It's a very good guide that, especially if you're interested in playing Emu, I think you're going to want to know. So please like the video and join our Patreon for free down below. And also, if you want to support the channel, you can do the paid version of Patreon. That will also count if you want to do that. And you'll get stuff like watching I finally am going to watch One Piece kind of series that I'm doing, and also some other extra commentary videos that I have. Thank you so much for watching. Hope to see you again soon. And let me know what deck you're interested in playing in the OP13 format. See you later.